So, it's been a few months now that I've had the CYBER Gadget Retro Freak, and I just felt like I should say a few more things about it. I feel I've put the console through the paces much better now than I have before. Also, it's definitely worth noting that I have updated the firmware since then. In my previous videos, I was still running the original stock firmware, and since then I have installed the February update that they had. Now, I know the Retro Freak is a relatively new console, and I'm sure there will be subsequent updates, but I just feel it's kind of interesting that the Retron 5, which again still has some issues of its own, hasn't had a firmware update since December of 2014. The current firmware was intended to improve the compatibility with other Sega consoles you'll be able to play with the forthcoming adapter. They also added corresponding buttons for those other cartridge formats. Those formats, of course, being the Mark III, otherwise known as Master System, the Sega My Card, the Sega SG-1000, and the Sega Game Gear. CYBER Freak's adapter should be made available sometime later this month. Right off the bat, I'm really impressed with how Game Gear ROMs run on this console. My only other experience emulating the Game Gear was with the Genesis Plus emulator on my Wii, and the games look and play so much better here. I'm not a fan of the Game Gear, but this may inspire me to try some of these titles out. And the SG-1000 being a console we never got to check out on this side of the world, it's really cool to check it out and see these games in a very high picture quality. Previously, I had attempted to run a few Master System titles with my Power-Base Mini, which led to some mixed results. Some games did work, but others did not. The console would recognize the games, but would not load the ROMs. But now, with the newer update, the compatibility is definitely improved. And speaking of cartridge adapters, it's also worth noting that I've had a lot of success using an NES to Famicom cartridge adapter. For those who've been watching my videos for some time, you'll be able to appreciate that with this adapter, the Retro Freak can play and recognize the non-Nintendo Seal versions of Super Mario Bros. 2 just fine. Since my last videos on the Retro Freak, I have also done some further testing of playing ROM files loaded directly to the SD card from a computer. Something I feel is worth noting is that if you load a large quantity of files to the SD card, it will take some time for the console to load the SD card's contents initially. It may seem like something's wrong, but after several minutes of load time, the SD card worked fine, as did many of the 6,000 plus ROMs I installed on it. I've also had the opportunity to test the use of a PlayStation 3 controller with the Retro Freak, and I'm really happy with how well it works. If I had more than one, or if I kept my PlayStation 3 in the same room as my Retro Freak, I would probably use it all the time. I've also tried using a cheap USB Super Nintendo style controller, and I've actually had problems with it being identified by the console, but then again, that controller was kind of a piece of junk. For those who are like me and more inclined to use a console over their computers to run emulation, the Retro Freak continues to impress. I'm sure if I find out any more neat, interesting things about this console, I will be sharing them right here on the channel, so do keep tuned. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.